circling. Is he gonna go? No, he's not. Oh, he's gone. It is the 5th of October now, and actually earlier this morning I handed in the sound part to my final project. And I thought it would be a really good time now to reflect on my creative process throughout the duration of this project. There's a few things I do to change it, there's a few things that I want to sort of do actually going forward, and I just sort of want to give you a rundown of how I got to where I was. So that's what this is for. In order to structure this video so that I don't go off-piste too often, I'm actually going to follow the 4 stages of a creative process. I haven't really planned this, I'm just going to sort of go for it and hope that I remember everything. So, preparation for this project began way before we were even meant to think about it. The reason for that is throughout the duration of the entire MA course that we've done, the year, we were asked on a regular basis who we want to be as practitioners. You know, when you leave here, what's your practice going to be? What are you going to do? Who are you going to be? Where have you come from and where do you want to get to? At the beginning, that was a very difficult thing to answer because you hadn't got to a point where you could leave whatever you've done in the past behind. So, as I'm sure I've mentioned in one of these videos, maybe one of the very first, I came into this course as a musical theatre performer, wanting to maybe write my own piece or change the musical theatre form up a little bit, but I wasn't exactly certain, and so to explore it was why I was on the course. And then we were asked, you know, what our practice was constantly. It wasn't until we had to do a presentation for one of our more sort of academic modules that I found theatre in the dark, and then suddenly became very interested in sound, because, you know, what is sound and what is vision, I suppose, when you're chucked into a pitch black environment. So the interest started then. So the presentation I did was the ethics of theatre in the dark, and whether it can be called theatre if it can't be seen, because theatre is derived from the Greek for theatron, which means place of seeing, and that should be in my research blog anyway, where I talk more about that. So preparation, I then got talking to some of the sound technicians at the university, and one of them mentioned in passing binaural audio. I was like, oh, what is this? YouTubed it, and then saw a video, I think from The Verge, I think it will be cited in my bibliography, but they had the 3DO headset microphone, and they had it in the middle of New York City. And when he flicked to this particular mic, I was like, my mind was blown. I was like, oh my god, I feel like I'm there. And I've never been to New York before, so it was actually a really nice taster of what it would be like. And so from that point, I then was really interested in immersive audio and tricking the mind, and, you know, thinking, how could I play with this particular form? So I spent some time looking into that. And then I went and did a placement with a music mixing engineer, which was just beyond helpful. And if I hadn't done that, I don't think I would have actually got the project that I've just handed in to the point that it is. So that was really useful, really helpful, because it was one less thing I had to teach myself. So at this point I knew that I wanted to do a sound piece. It was during the exploring practices, which was the run up to summer, and during that time I knew that I definitely wanted to go into sound design. So I had finally, after months and months of being asked, finally found what I wanted to do, what my practice was going to be, and it was going to be a sound designer which specialised in immersive audio. Ta-da! There's my title! So that's where that began, and in terms of the actual content, I didn't really get that until we specifically started the module for this particular project. It was a little bit of discussion with Joe, the course leader, who was trying to work out what we were all doing, and we were discussing sort of novels and maybe doing an adaptation, and I think she mentioned David Mitchell, and I'd not read any of his stuff before, and I was like, okay, let's go and have a look. And then I found the Bone Clocks. The reason that I chose the Bone Clocks was because initially in the preparations I was very much interested in time, what time means to everybody else, and I almost wanted to play with time a little bit within the sound piece, and I wanted everything to have a cyclical motion. And then the Bone Clocks was mentioned, and I grabbed the book, which is huge. I think I've shown it before, and started reading, and then the ideas started flowing then. And in the novel, time jumps around like a lunatic. You never quite know which point you're at, even if a chapter's particularly dated, or a section rather. I don't think there's really chapters, it's more like sections of the book, but each section has a particular time era, but you're never, it's very subtle when you sort of move into the more sort of fantasy kind of, the fantasy world, as it were. So I spent a lot of time reading that book, good chunky book, and I found the section that was titled An Horologist's Labyrinth. Now, horology is all to do with time, so that fitted with my initial concept really well. And a labyrinth, I was like, yeah. So I thought, okay, trying to build a labyrinth through audio alone and taking people into this fabricated world through audio could be really exciting. And that's where I stuck. And I don't think I actually moved forward with this for a long time. And having recently read up on the creative process and the stages that there are in that, I was actually in the incubation phase. Not my title, which is where you've sort of planted a seed of your own in your own mind about an idea that you want to do. And I think for me especially, I was like, yeah, great, okay, I've got the idea, now what? And so I spent probably longer than necessary reading the section that I was going to adapt over and over and over again, trying to work out how I was going to make it into a sound. And then, so that was probably a few weeks worth of just research and thinking and learning of Logic Pro. You'll see in my research blog that I spent a good chunk of my time just learning what I could do in Logic Pro, which has turned out to be incredibly important and useful, so that's fine. Then came a day where I sat down and I just started writing an adaptation, and although it's changed a lot from the beginning, because it does, I started to feel way more comfortable with the piece, and I could, because I was rewriting certain things, I could then hear in my imagination how I'd want it to sound. And that's when I then went to get some equipment, so I used a contact mic a lot of the time. I'll go into this a little bit more in detail. I spent ages trying to adapt it because the text of David Mitchell was so rich. I didn't want to take too much out. But actually in the end, and I might talk more about the final product a bit more, but in the end I actually used a lot less of the text than I had originally thought I would, so it changes. In terms of recording, I spent a lot of time in previous videos talking about the equipment I used and what I was recording, and I think I was pretty successful in that. I didn't have much time. I managed to get maybe 250 sounds recorded. Different variations of some sounds, so like a washing machine for example has loads of different tones when you use a contact mic. So I think I had 8 different washing machine sounds, but each one can be used in a number of ways, and due to the plugins that Logic has, you can manipulate them and turn them into something mystical and wonderful. So using the contact mic was very, very easy for someone who was sort of never really done recording before. And everything that I stumbled upon in a house just outside turned into a toy, and I was like, oh, I wonder what that would sound like when I record it. And the sounds that I've recorded, I have used, and they are the base, they are the foundations of the labyrinth. The project I talked about in my previous video, the assessment feedback video, that was all my own sounds, and I was very proud of that fact. I had managed to create something that sounded like something from sounds that I'd made myself. A lot of it was manipulated. I had not a lot actually, I had a number of different plugins due to it being a labyrinth, and the further I went on, the more I realised that the sort of look and feel was quite a stony, underground, cave-like labyrinth. I think that's what I've always seen in my mind, so I felt like it was relatively echoey and quite narrow, but went on and on. So I used lots of reverb to try and make sure that the noise bounced back. I used a lot of low-pass filters and, what else have I used? Noise gates as well. This is in the most updated version, so to just talk about the updates, I have added maybe 20 or 30 more sounds into my piece from the sound library. A couple of them are repeated throughout the project as well to try and keep it tied in, and it is sounding a lot richer. It's a bit more grounded now. There are the odd footstep here and there. I've tried not to make it too sort of gimmicky. And from that I've learnt about different plugins as well. So I've used a tremolo to sort of make noises move left and right. I use a noise gate to actually glitch certain sounds. So I use a washing machine tone at certain points, and I set the noise gate so it just starts turning off at a certain level, and this causes a really nice glitch effect. And once I'd heard that, I started using it more, but sort of peppered it throughout the piece to signify the fact that the fabric of this world that doesn't actually exist is starting to break down. Whether or not I've achieved that, I'm not sure. I think it might be a little bit too subtle, or it might be a noise that actually doesn't make sense yet because the piece is still actually under construction. You know, I've built this whole thing in about 5 weeks, which isn't a very long time in the grand scheme of things. You know, talking to my supervisor, you know, he said if you had a year, and you know, if I had a year, I think I could probably make this into something really special. But I don't. I had 5 weeks, and that's what I've done. So all the plugins that I've used actually make the sounds something completely different. So I've mentioned in previous videos that I recorded the vibrations of the electric gates that I have to get into the building I live in, and when I changed and added certain plugins to that, it made this really lovely eerie tone, and I decided that that was going to be the tone of the labyrinth, and that sort of tone continues throughout the piece. As well as the binaural dialogue, I recorded the dialogue myself, and this is at the stage where the adaptation completely flipped on its head, because I went to record and I felt that I could just use Holly's voice, because in the scene it's actually Holly and Marinus, and they switch between each other's conscious mind. So I decided to just keep it as Holly and have the audience member as the second character, but they don't speak. It's just it's a monologue basically, and Holly takes you through the labyrinth. In the original version there was still quite a lot of dialogue. I have toned it down. I've stripped a little bit back where perhaps there was a bit too much speech and not enough labyrinth going on. So the piece is a tiny bit shorter. It was 15 minutes, it's now 11 and a half. But I think due to the actual textures that I've added that was requested before, it's much easier to listen to. I mean, that's what I think anyway. The module that we're doing is the independent project, and this was very much independent. I recorded the sounds before I even hit the sound library. I recorded the character, I acted. I haven't done acting for a long time. I acted with the binaural mics that I had in my bathroom, you know, because of the acoustics, why not? and built the whole thing. And I think for someone who's never done that before, I feel quite proud of that. I definitely want to continue it because I don't feel like I've finished it at all. If anything, I just want to keep plugging away and see how far I can take it. I'm making this video with the 4 stages of the creative process, which are preparation, incubation, illumination and implementation. So the illumination was when I finally realised, you know, what the labyrinth's going to sound like, how it looks in my head, and having that sort of question, can I build a labyrinth through audio alone, and can I manipulate an audience's interior architectures to make them feel like they are in that space. I think the pitch black environment helped with that, because you suddenly can feel quite enclosed even though you see the space around you. As soon as the lights go off, you think, oh crap, actually that feels a bit strange, because you're submerged in nothing, and it can feel quite close. I'm going to do a final outcome sort of reflection on my blog. I'm going to write one because I think I can be a little bit more descriptive in a written version, and I will be talking about whether I think I achieved the goal, if I've hit the research inquiry that I've been asked to make for this project. But I'll do it in a written sort of conclusion, and I think I'll include sort of a whole sort of roundup of the year, I think, within that as well. Because, as I said, most of the year of this course has been building up to this, and without it I wouldn't have got where I was. The 4th and final stage of the creative process, without getting nitpicky about actually is this the process or not, but Graham Wallace's version is implementation. Now, a lot of the implementation has actually all been in Logic Pro. The building, the listening and the acting and putting it all together. But I also want to talk about how I actually had it in the space for my assessment, because that was quite an important part of this whole thing. For the module, we didn't have to get assessed twice. So we have an assessment, sort of a performance assessment, and then we hand in, like I handed in half of it today, I'll hand in the rest of it tomorrow, and then it gets not reassessed, it just gets assessed and sort of added. And I suppose with all the improvement, I say they're improvements, but with everything that I've done, trying to take the feedback on and trying to implement things that were suggested into my piece, I think it then just gets added on and you get assessed a little bit more. So the other thing that I needed to make sure was that any specks of light were gone. It's very difficult at the moment, especially in an educational establishment as well, to break health and safety regulations. So we couldn't turn fire exit signs off, but within this space there was there were LED lights on sort of, I think, sensors and Wi-Fi bits and pieces. The smallest lights you can think of, and when you turned all the lights off and you tried to make it pitch black, they turned out to be the brightest lights you could imagine. They were like the sun in that space, they were so bright. So I spoke to the tech guys and they said I could tape over them, which I did, and it made all the difference. Couldn't really see your hand in front of your face, and that's what I was going for, so that was good. So with the setup for the actual playback, I had my laptop connected to a sound desk, an Allen and Heath Q16 if you must know, and I then had sounds going from that into a headphone amp, which allowed me to connect 5 headphones at a time, which was really handy, as well as having the sound desk going into a big sub and the speakers of the room as well. And that meant that I could actually play live in the space some of the low-end frequencies to make the audience feel the rumbles as well as hear them, and I think that sort of lifted the project quite a lot. It's a shame I can't really hand that whole setup in, because, you know, the assessors ain't gonna feel it, are they? But that's how it was, and I think it worked. I also tricked people. I feel like I tricked them, or just they couldn't really work out what they were listening to at the end when I had this song, which I think I mentioned in my other video was just sort of as a credit, sort of play out song. I had that going through into the headphones as well as the main speakers of the studio, so when everyone took off their headphones they could still hear the music, and quite a few people I clocked were putting the headphones back on and taking them off to check that they, well, I mean, without putting words in their mouth, I think maybe they were checking that they weren't going insane. What else do I need to say? It was really useful being in the space and actually playing it to people. I'd spent a lot of time sort of hugging it very close to myself, and I didn't really share it very often. Actually, I don't think I shared it at all until the assessment, which maybe was a bad idea, but it's because I wasn't ready for people to hear it, and I thought because it's the assessment they have to, you know, you can't argue with that really. It was good to share, people's feedback was great, and then obviously I had the feedback from the assessors and I could make improvements, even though I didn't take the feedback very well initially. The other reason it was good to be in the space was it actually gave me food for thought for how I would do it again, or how I would do it in the future, or if I had a bigger budget and more time, what I would do. You know, the budget for this was 50 quid. You know, I get why, education, but when you're doing such a technical project, it's, you know, you can't really do an awful lot with that. You know, initially I wanted to grab some wireless headphones so that people could walk through the space. Having worked on the project, that wouldn't have been logistical anyway, because people would have just crashed and probably injured themselves, so it's probably best that they didn't. But what the budget did get me were red torches, because with pitch black theatre you have to make sure that you've covered every base, and in the assessment I didn't do that very well. On my website I actually give some more rules about sort of, if you come to see one of my performances, this is what it feels like, this is how it is, if you're scared of the dark, or if you feel claustrophobic, or, you know, lots of sort of terms and conditions, T's and C's are put on the website to make sure that the assessors know that I have really thought about the duty of care to my audience for a pitch black environment. It can invoke some quite weird reactions, and you don't realise that you're never quite in the pitch black until you're chucked in it and you're trapped in it, and I don't want people to feel trapped. So I bought these red torches, which I believe stargazers and night photographers use, and what the red LEDs do is it means you can see better in the dark, but the light doesn't actually disrupt your night vision. So the red torches were there. If people needed to leave the space, I could go and get them and use the red torch to sort of guide them out, and it shouldn't be too much of a distraction to the other audience members, who more often than not probably would have closed their eyes anyway, so they may not have even noticed, but should they have opened their eyes, which is what I wanted anyway, to make people feel like they're awake in a space, it wouldn't disrupt them as much as, say, a white torch would. When I talk about the fact that I wanted people to have their eyes open, that was discussed quite a lot in some of the sharing sessions. So people talked about, you know, to get the pitch black environment, if I couldn't have dimmed all the lights and sort of blocked out certain LEDs, they were suggesting using eye masks. And I pushed back on that one quite a lot, for two reasons. One being that actually I don't particularly like having a mask on my face. I have claustrophobia, and if I have a mask on I feel like I can't escape, and plunging people in the dark with an eye mask to me would make me feel like I'm completely trapping them in that space, and I didn't want to do that. But secondly is space. I'm creating a labyrinth through audio, or at least trying to. If people have a mask on, they immediately have something very, very close here, so they always have that sense that something is touching them, and it keeps them in the real world. This is my thinking behind this. If you have nothing on and you have the option to open your eyes and you're still in the pitch black, I feel like you then can start to see better, because your eyes are open, even if you can't see. There was a study which I talk about in my research blog where 6 volunteers are placed into a a cell, I suppose, for 48 hours with zero light. They get fed, but they have nothing, no visual stimulation, no music, and it's a controversial study, and it was one that was done, I think, 20 years previously, to see the reactions on the body when you have zero light. One of the guys who did the most recent one, I think it was a BBC Horizon documentary actually, he said that towards the end of his time in the, I don't want to call it a cell, but that's all I can think it is, he actually could swear that he saw a pile of glistening oyster shells in the corner where he was, clear as day. Senses go crazy and your brain starts saying, oh come on, there's got to be oysters in the corner. So if you can have your eyes open in the dark, I felt like that would sort of not force it, but help and guide the audience a little bit into the labyrinth. You can't go through a labyrinth with your eyes closed. It doesn't, you crash into every wall possible. So that was my creative process, and it's still not over. Even though I'm handing in everything and it's going to be over in just over 24 hours, freedom is around the corner, I'm not done. I've got so far to go, and I want to keep going with it. To be sure that I can do it, it's something that I do want to do now as my career, so it's going to be something I'll be pushing for. But I want to take it to the next stage. In my previous video, I think I mentioned that some of the tutors would have been really excited had I brought in some haptic sort of touching and some more immersive theatre-esque type activities, so I could actually be in the space with the people, technically acting, guiding people, that sort of thing. If I had a bigger budget and some more time, I could absolutely do that, and I feel like it would really heighten the mood of the piece. Originally, before we were told what the actual budget was, I had in my mind the idea that I could actually build a maze in the studio and use ever so soft lighting just to sort of glow here, and you would see the silhouette of a person just disappearing around a corner, and the audience would know to follow. This is if they would have wireless headphones on. So that would therefore make it more an immersive theatre piece rather than just an immersive audio piece. The whole point of this project has been purely immersive audio. I've never quite thought about bringing in the theatrical side of things because I actually wanted to concentrate on the audio element, and I wanted to be sure that I could effectively build something just through audio alone without having to fall back on physical reality. But as an experience, it would make it really not inviting. I think that would be quite frightening because it still would be pitch black more often than not. But I think it would just sort of lift the piece and bring it to life a little bit more. But like I said, I've wanted to make an immersive audio piece, not an immersive audio theatre piece. There's a sort of a fine crossover, I think. But I absolutely would build on this and create an environment and invite audience to experience it and have the touching, or so there's this dusk element in this piece, and when the dusk came in, I was like, oh, I could get like not a wind machine because that would be really loud, but even just a fan in the space. I think it would add to it as well. Even if it was just like a slight breeze, it would just add that extra layer. It's all been about building layers and building textures. Bringing in that physical element would just add an extra texture and an extra layer to the piece, and I would love to do something like this in the future. I think this would be really cool as a Halloween project, maybe not this story, but something similar, or I could just sort of tweak the story to be a little bit more horrific. But if I had the budget and the time, that's what I would do. I would take it to a next level, but make sure that my sound design skills don't get lost. It would just be very easy for the sound part of it to get lost in the theatre of it all, and this is a sound project, audio only. I know that my MA is theatre arts. It's not an MA sound design or MA sound course. It's theatre arts, so there has to be a theatrical element in there, but for this project the theatrical element was within the sound, building that scape building a labyrinth through audio, having the monologue going through it, and trying to make the audience feel like they are there. And I think I succeeded in some areas, and I'm not going to say failed, I need to improve on other areas. But over the last 4-5 months, this is all I've been doing, and it's been what I've been building on from nothing to where I am now. I think it's no mean feat, personally. It's the most work I have ever done, and it is something that I will continue with. And the creative process probably won't change, to be honest. It will be a lot of thinking, and then a lot of reading, and then spending time not reading and doing nothing because real life gets in the way. Then it'll be eureka moment, this is what it's going to be, this is how it's going to sound, and then the implementation part of it all could start. So we'll see how it goes. I hope this has given some kind of idea as to my process. I haven't got any videos of me working. I haven't got any, apart from actually, which I could put in now, some Logic screen recordings that I've done, but it doesn't have any sound. I haven't got any videos of me working, or me working and acting with the binaural head, which actually, having thought about it, I probably should have done, because that would have really helped this situation. But I didn't, but I will do that in the future. This whole creative process is one learning curve as well. When I start doing this more, I will remember to film more so that I've got the documentation there and I can use it should I have to pitch it to someone, you know, that sort of thing. So it's all very positive. I think I'm feeling really positive because I'm nearly at the end, and it's been quite the roller coaster. So I'm going to end this here. Check out and keep an eye on the blog for more updates and that final conclusion, reflection, and yeah, I will catch you later.